The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the quiet streets of Ridgewood as 17-year-old Maya Carter walked home from school. With her headphones in, she barely noticed the police cruiser creeping up behind her. She was only a few blocks from home when a harsh voice cut through her music. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" Maya pulled out her earbuds and turned, her heart already racing. A tall, broad-shouldered officer stepped out of the car, his hand resting on his belt. His nameplate read Officer Dunning. "What's the problem?" Maya asked, keeping her voice steady. Dunning's eyes narrowed. "Don't get smart with me. You match the description of a suspect." Maya frowned. "What suspect?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed her arm roughly. Instinctively, she yanked back. That was when it happened. His fist came fast and hard, striking her across the face. Maya hit the ground, the taste of blood filling her mouth. She gasped, clutching her cheek in shock. Bystanders froze, some pulling out their phones, recording. A familiar voice roared through the street. "What the hell is going on here?" Maya turned her head just in time to see her father, Samuel Carter, running toward her. He was furious, his hands clenched into fists. "She resisted," Officer Dunning said, as if that justified his actions. Samuel knelt beside Maya, his hands trembling as he checked her face. Then his eyes locked onto the officer's badge. His anger deepened. "You messed up," he said in a dangerously low tone. "You have no idea who she is." Officer Dunning scoffed. "And who the hell is she supposed to be?" Maya wiped her lip, looking up at him with piercing eyes. "The new chief in town." Dunning laughed, but that laughter would soon fade. Officer Dunning's laughter echoed through the street, but it was short-lived. He glanced at Maya again, scoffing. "Chief? Yeah, right." Samuel Carter helped his daughter to her feet, his grip steady, despite the rage boiling inside him. "You just assaulted the wrong person, officer," he said through clenched teeth. Dunning shook his head. "I don't care who she is. She resisted an officer. That's all that matters." The bystanders murmured, their cameras still recording. Some whispered Maya's name, realizing who she was. Others gasped, recognizing Samuel Carter, not just as Maya's father, but as the former deputy chief of Ridgewood. "I'm placing her under arrest," Dunning declared, reaching for his cuffs. But before he could touch Maya again, another voice cut through the tension. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The crowd parted as a second police cruiser pulled up. A man in a crisp uniform stepped out, Captain Ruiz, head of the precinct. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes locked onto Dunning with quiet fury. "Captain, Dunning started. Ruiz raised a hand, silencing him. Then he turned to Maya. "Are you all right, Chief Carter?" Dunning's face twisted in confusion. "Chief what?" Maya straightened her shoulders, despite the pain in her jaw. "Chief Maya Carter, the new police chief of Ridgewood." The silence was deafening. Dunning's face drained of color as realization dawned. He had punched his own superior. The bystanders murmured louder. Cameras zoomed in. Maya took a deep breath. "Officer Dunning," she said firmly, her voice carrying authority. "You're suspended, effective immediately." Dunning stammered, his confidence shattering. You can't do that." Ruiz stepped forward. "Oh, she absolutely can." Maya's gaze was steel. "And trust me, that's just the beginning." Officer Dunning stood frozen, his face a mix of disbelief and growing panic. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, phones still pointed at him, capturing every second of his downfall. "You think you can just," he started, but Maya cut him off with a sharp glare. "This isn't up for debate," she said firmly. "You assaulted an unarmed civilian without cause. Worse, you did it in front of witnesses." Dunning's fists clenched. "She resisted." "Resisted what?" Maya challenged. "Standing on the sidewalk? Talking to her father?" Captain Ruiz stepped beside Maya, arms crossed. "You're done, Dunning. Hand over your badge and weapon." Dunning's jaw clenched, his hands hovering over his belt. He looked around, searching for support from his fellow officers, but they avoided his gaze. Even his usual allies weren't willing to defend him now. Slowly, he unhooked his badge and placed it in Ruiz's outstretched hand. The gun followed a moment later. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I was just doing my job." Maya stepped closer, her voice calm but laced with steel. "If this is how you think policing works, then you were never fit for the job." The crowd erupted in hushed conversations, the weight of the moment sinking in. A black police chief standing up against corruption, right in front of them. Dunning took a step back, his face red with fury. This isn't over, he spat. Maya didn't flinch. No, it's not, she agreed. Because now, we're going to make sure this department is truly cleaned up. Dunning turned, shoving past the onlookers as he stormed away. But Maya knew this was only the beginning. As Officer Dunning disappeared into the crowd, Captain Ruiz let out a heavy sigh. Well, Chief, you sure know how to make an entrance. Maya smirked but kept her focus on the shaken officers who remained. I didn't come here to make an entrance, she said. I came here to fix this mess. The bystanders, still recording, watched in awe. Some whispered amongst themselves, others openly cheered. Maya turned to them, raising a hand. I appreciate you all standing up for what's right, but this situation isn't over. We need real change, not just a viral video. An older woman in the crowd stepped forward. Chief, we've been dealing with officers like Dunning for years. What are you going to do different? Maya's expression hardened. I'm going to clean house. Officers who abuse their power will be held accountable, and the community will have a voice in this department. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Meanwhile, Officer Reynolds, one of Dunning's closest allies, shifted uneasily. He exchanged nervous glances with the other officers. If Dunning could fall this easily, who was next? Captain Ruiz noticed the tension and stepped forward. Anyone who thinks Chief Williams is playing games, think again. This department will be reformed. Maya nodded. That starts with full cooperation. Any officer involved in discriminatory policing, unnecessary force, or corruption will be dealt with swiftly. The officers stood silent. Some nodded in agreement, while others, like Reynolds, kept their expressions unreadable. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Maya turned to Ruiz. I need full reports on every complaint against officers in this precinct. No cover-ups, no excuses. Ruiz nodded. I'll have them on your desk by morning. Maya took a deep breath. Today was just the beginning. The real fight was about to start. Maya sat in her newly claimed office, staring at the stack of files Captain Ruiz had delivered. The sheer number of complaints against officers, including Dunning, was staggering. Excessive force, racial profiling, intimidation tactics. It was worse than she had imagined. Ruiz stood across from her, arms crossed. I won't lie, Chief. This department has had problems for years. Some officers think they're untouchable. Maya flipped through a report on Dunning. And what about the higher-ups? Who's been covering for them? Ruiz hesitated, then leaned in. The old chief turned a blind eye. He let officers like Dunning run wild because they brought in arrests, numbers over integrity. Maya exhaled sharply. That ends now. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from a local reporter. Chief Williams, I have footage of Officer Dunning's past incidents. Some never made it to internal affairs. Let's talk. Her eyes narrowed. If this was true, then Dunning's violent streak had been suppressed for years. She looked at Ruiz. I need to meet with someone, but I want you to quietly start reviewing these files. Any officer with a history like Dunning's needs to be investigated immediately. Ruiz nodded. I'll get on it. As Maya left the office, she knew this was bigger than just one bad cop. This was a system that had protected officers like Dunning for far too long, but now the system had a new chief, and she wasn't afraid to burn it down and rebuild it the right way. Maya arrived at a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town. The reporter, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a worn-out notebook, was already waiting. You must be Chief Williams, she said, motioning for Maya to sit. Maya nodded. And you have evidence on Dunning? The reporter, Lisa Monroe, slid a USB drive across the table. This has body cam footage, witness testimonies, and internal reports, many of which were buried or misplaced under the previous administration. Maya inserted the USB into her laptop and pressed play. The first clip showed Dunning violently shoving a handcuffed black man into a squad car, laughing as the man hit his head. Another video displayed him threatening a teenager, gun drawn, for allegedly jaywalking, her hands clenched into fists. How did this never see the light of day? Lisa sighed. The department always claimed lack of evidence or procedural errors, but some officers knew the truth. A few even tried to report him, but were silenced. Maya's stomach twisted. This wasn't just about one officer's misconduct. It was about an entire system that enabled it. Do you have any sources inside the department? Maya asked. Lisa hesitated, then nodded. A few, but they're afraid. Retaliation is real. Maya closed her laptop. Not anymore. Things are going to change. Lisa smirked. I hope so, Chief, because if you take this public, the city will erupt. Maya stood, gripping the USB tightly. Good. Maybe it's time this city faced the truth. She walked out of the cafe with a single thought. Dunning and his allies weren't just going to lose their badges. They were going to face justice. Maya sat in her office, the USB drive clutched in her hand like a ticking time bomb. The weight of the evidence inside it was immense, enough to take down Dunning and anyone who had covered for him. But she knew this wouldn't be easy. She picked up her phone and dialed an old friend, Internal Affairs Captain James Holloway. I need to see you, Maya said, her voice steady. Chief Williams, Holloway responded, intrigued. This sounds serious. It is. I have evidence of serious misconduct. I need to make sure it doesn't disappear. There was silence on the other end before Holloway spoke. Meet me at my office in an hour. Maya arrived at the Internal Affairs Division, a department known for its strained relationship with street officers. Holloway, a seasoned investigator, greeted her with a firm handshake. Show me what you've got, he said, motioning her to sit. She plugged in the USB and watched as his expression darkened. When the final video ended, he exhaled sharply. This is bad, he muttered. This isn't just Dunning. This implicates half a dozen officers. Maya nodded. Which is why we have to act carefully. If word gets out before we're ready, they'll bury this, or worse. Holloway rubbed his temples. I can launch an internal probe, but these guys have deep connections. I don't need an internal probe, Maya countered. I need arrests. Holloway studied her, then nodded slowly. If you're serious about this, Chief, you're about to make a lot of enemies. Maya leaned forward. Good. Let them know I'm coming. The next morning, Maya arrived at the precinct to an uneasy atmosphere. The whispers had begun. Officers who had once greeted her with nods now avoided her gaze. Word was spreading. Something was coming, and they knew she was behind it. As she stepped into her office, her assistant, Carla, gave her a worried look. Chief, there's been a situation. Maya tensed. What happened? Carla lowered her voice. Detective Holloway was followed home last night. He said his car was tampered with. Someone wants to scare him off. Maya clenched her jaw. It had begun. She grabbed her phone and dialed Holloway. Are you all right? She asked. I'm fine, he said, though she could hear the frustration in his voice. They're getting desperate. That means we're getting close. Yeah, but close doesn't mean safe, Holloway warned. You need to watch your back, Maya. Maya hung up and leaned back in her chair. She had expected pushback, but this was escalating quickly. She needed to move fast. She called a press conference for the afternoon. If she made the information public, it would be harder for them to cover it up. By noon, reporters filled the precinct's briefing room, their cameras and microphones ready. Maya stepped up to the podium. As of today, an official investigation is underway regarding multiple instances of misconduct within this department, she announced, her voice unwavering. No one is above the law. The room buzzed with questions, but Maya remained firm. She knew this was just the beginning. Dunning and his allies would fight back. But she was ready. Maya barely had time to leave the press conference before the backlash began. Her phone buzzed non-stop, calls from city officials, concerned community leaders, and angry officers. Some supported her, others warned her she was making enemies she couldn't afford. But Maya had no intention of backing down. As she walked back to her office, she saw Officer Dunning standing near the break room, talking to a group of officers. The moment he saw her, he smirked. Making quite a name for yourself, Chief, he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. Hope you know what you're doing. Maya didn't flinch. I always do. The tension in the room was thick. She could feel the eyes of several officers on her, waiting to see what would happen next. Dunning stepped closer, lowering his voice. You think you're cleaning up this department? You're making a mess you can't control. Maya met his gaze. The only mess here is corruption, and I will clean it up. Dunning's smirk faded, but he said nothing. He turned and walked away, his fists clenched. Maya knew she had struck a nerve. Back in her office, Detective Holloway was already waiting. Bad news, he said, closing the door behind him. An anonymous complaint just went out against you. Maya raised an eyebrow. Let me guess, claims of misconduct? Holloway nodded. They're trying to discredit you before you take them down. Maya took a deep breath. She had expected this, but if they thought she would fold under pressure, They had no idea who they were dealing with. She picked up her phone and made another call. Time to bring in some reinforcements. The next morning, Maya arrived at the station, prepared for battle. News of the internal complaint against her had already spread, but she had come armed with something much stronger: evidence. She stepped into the department's main briefing room, where officers, detectives, and even a few high-ranking officials had gathered. The room buzzed with tension. At the center of it all was Officer Dunning, standing smugly with his arms crossed. Maya wasted no time. She pulled up a video on the screen, a body cam recording from another officer on the scene the day of the incident. "Let's review exactly what happened," Maya said, her voice steady. The footage showed Dunning punching Amir unprovoked. It caught the cruel smirk on his face, the panic in his father's eyes, and the moment officers dragged Amir away as if he was the threat. The room fell silent. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Others glanced at Dunning, their expressions unreadable. "That's not," Dunning started, but Maya cut him off. "There's more." She played another clip, this time of Dunning's past complaints, reports of excessive force, and evidence of his misconduct. "This department has protected men like him for too long. That ends today," Maya declared. Gasps rippled through the room. The mayor and city officials who had been hesitant at first now had no choice. The evidence was overwhelming. Dunning was immediately placed on unpaid leave, pending investigation. As security escorted him out, he glared at Maya. "You think this is over?" Maya met his stare. "No, Dunning, it's just beginning." Justice had been served. But Maya knew her fight was far from over. She was ready for whatever came next. If this story moved you, don't stay silent. Speak up against injustice. Share this with others, start conversations, and stand for accountability in law enforcement. Every voice matters. Every action counts. Let's create a world where justice isn't just a word, it's a reality. What will you do to make a difference? Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more.